Welcome to Portals of Perception and to Current Openings. What the world doesn't quite get yet, a conversation where David Price Francis and I dive in the current of this moment to discover what is opening. Today, we've gathered to ponder the actuality of living in conductive times, increasingly conductive times. David, welcome.
Thank you, Aviv. Good to see you. Glad to be with you for, I think it's current openings 21.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Indeed. What an important number.
Yeah.
Actually, what brought us to today was that we reflected on the last one, on number 20, on the appreciation of the epoch. And that's what leads us into the inquiry of conductivity. And what I would like us to do is I'd like us to bring into this exploration the scaffolds we established in our first ever episode when we talked about our three sisters. Three sisters was a poetic way to describe the three perspectives of exoteric, mesoteric, and esoteric. So I would like to bring these, then offer a seeding of the human as an electrical, energetic being, and then lead into the exploration of conductive times and several questions about that. So how about that as a plan?
That sounds like a good place to start, Aviv.
Okay, so
Quite open topic, and it's certainly one the world doesn't quite get yet.
indeed, indeed. So let me lead to and bring these slides that enable us to flow and play jazz with. So indeed, current openings 21,
Yeah.
living in conductive times, the conductivity mystery. So we want to bring the consideration of the three levels of knowledge. So the exoteric perspective would be that it's information that we are receiving at an exoteric level, and that when you are talking about mesoteric, you are talking about knowledge. And that when you bring the consideration of esoteric, well, it becomes transformation. So that's an exoteric perspective of these three dimensions. When we take it a little deeper into the mesoteric appreciation, well, the mesoteric will offer that the exoteric perspective explores expansive data sources, that the mesoteric endeavor is one where you organize, you categorize, and you order knowledge in some kind of a cosmology, some kind of a hierarchy, and that the esoteric consideration is one where we look to engage a source that opens new perceptions and new perspectives. And before I go to esoteric, anything that comes alive for you just in these two initial framings?
I think to pick up on what you said earlier about well, let's look at exoteric information, the amount of information that now is abroad and the knowledge that is abroad about how the human is an energy being. We conduct ourselves in certain ways. And 45 years ago, it was really still quite rarely spoken about, even the idea of the brain working with electrical signals, like, working with an encephalograph, or the idea that you could flex a muscle, and if it was correctly wired, you could light up a light bulb. Now, these kind of things were just being discovered. So I would just highlight that about the fact that as a human being, we ourselves are conductors of energy in terms of this mystery of conductivity, and how there's more exoteric information out there. And I suppose at the mesoteric level, just how much medicine these days is now focused on the working with electrical current. So whether it be ultrasounds, laser surgeries, all of these things are working with electricity in direct ways. So exploring the working with conductivity in the mesoteric level, at that esoteric, mesoteric, working with new knowledge about how the conductivity of the electricity discovered mostly in the last century can then be employed and is employed in methods of surgery and all kinds of ways I'm sure we're going to open up as we go forward. But just to kind of make a little highlight as we go through.
Indeed. I like it that you have developed a habit of reading my slides before I bring them up, because we of course never rehearse anything here, but you always have a way of reading 2 or 3 steps ahead, which is great, and I'm not surprised. So indeed, when we bring the esoteric dimension, we would offer that the esoteric view of exoteric is that an exoteric metabolism is important because it's how you really metabolize the vast reference fields of life. Very important, has an important function. And that mesoteric nourishes the enclosures that contain and support the core. And that the esoteric view of esoteric is that it liberates the core and its communion and transmission potential. So these are some esoteric articulations of these 3. And what I also want to try to establish is an appreciation of the octave shift or polarity shift that occurs when we move from mesoteric to esoteric. Okay?
So that's why you have that purple line across there.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Indeed. So there are 2 moves we're making here. I propose that the exoteric to mesoteric move is a forward deepening move. Okay, I move forward and I move into deeper grounds. Then the move from mesoteric into esoteric is not a forward move. It's one where I turn around and I begin to move with my back into the unknown, into the realm of mystery, into the realms where I often cannot gain purchase purely by sensory input. I need a different faculty, a different sensibility, a different attunement to begin to unlock the esoteric appreciation. So, but what's a way to ground this in an even simpler way if you're stumbling for the first time about those 3 dimensions? Where, let me offer 2 examples. So there is this word which I claim is the second most confused word in the dictionary. The word, it's a 4-letter word, and the word is love. Okay? So when people say, I love chocolate ice cream, that's an exoteric usage of the word love. When you enjoy so much something you're doing and you go with the flow that you even lose the sense of time, that is a good mesoteric experience and appreciation of love. Well, when we say that the move from the mesoteric to the esoteric is a turnaround, if I say that at a mesoteric level, love is doing what you most feel like doing, what would be the reverse octave? The reverse octave will be love is what you do when you least feel like doing it. Okay? So when you are exhausted and you hear the sound of a crying baby in the middle of the night, why do you get up? It's the last thing on earth you want to do. But you love, so now somebody would say, well, it's biological response. Correct, it's biological response You embody the love so much that you cannot but respond to the call, even if it is the last thing you ever want to do. So that's an example of how love reverses itself from one dimension to another. Let me give a second definition and then see if you, a second example, and then see if you want to offer any other appreciation of those moves. So let's take the word work. Well, at an exoteric level, work is the job I get paid to do. It's at a mesoteric level, you would say that you could approach it in two ways. One way, you could approach it that work is really a formula in physics, W equal F times S, which is the application of force along a vector of distance, along displacement. But that's if you play physics. The good example that will, for me, differentiate mesoteric from esoteric appreciation of work is that there was a time, David, when I wanted to really push the envelope and discover how many large projects I could run concurrently. So I managed to expand to running 7 large corporate complex projects by myself. How did I do that? Well, I discovered that working smart is to delegate as much as I could back to the corporate client and do the least amount of work necessary for me to be able to truly bring the differentiating value I was bringing. So in this case, work meant to do the least amount of work necessary. So that's a mesoteric personal management with work. When it comes to esoteric, I discovered and appreciated that with certain realms, especially when you look to do the refinement of yourself as a vessel, such that you are a better tool, better instrument for finer intelligence to work through you, you often will do the very opposite. You will do the unnecessary work. So rather than doing the least amount of work, I found that I was time and again compelled to do the unnecessary work. That meant I would explore spaces I didn't have to explore. I would investigate in myself inquiries I didn't need to. Why? Because I discovered that if I traverse the territory and cultivate not 93% of the territory, but 94, 95, or 96% readiness to the degree that I could, then something else will find me and will choose to work through me. Not because I was seeking to be perfect, but because I exercised devotional diligence. So these are some examples of why I'm suggesting that there is a reversal. There is a reversal on the move from the mesoteric to the esoteric. And this will become important when we explore in a few minutes conductivities and we look to understand what are conductivities, why are they increasing, where are they increasing from, what's the meaning of that increase, and how are we called to respond to those increases. So what comes alive for you when anything that you'd want to build on these two moves from deepening from exoteric to mesoteric and a reversal from mesoteric to esoteric?
A couple of things. One is to pick up on the work theme and just working it through again, that at the exoteric level, work primarily being for money and for working for someone else, and it engages only part of our system. So, for example, a person gets a job and they're working, let's say, construction, and they're paid by the day or by the week to be doing a certain level of work, and then they employ the part of themselves that's needed to do that. The mesoteric tends to be the person who becomes like the architect, who actually then lays down the blueprints that other people will then work according to those blueprints. kind of like the level of mastery. Um, and that's then where the mesoteric person has that extra knowledge, and then that knowledge is applied back into the exoteric. And usually the mesoteric receives more pay, there's more work involved, and it involves more of them, particularly at the level of the brain usually. But then the esoteric, I think of work at the esoteric level as an active form of prayer. That is, as you said, it has the devotional aspect. So it engages the whole person, the mental life, the emotional life, and the physical life. And that then produces a much higher level of potential conductivity when we get to that. And you kind of go from the mastery to the mystery. The mastery, the mesoteric, like, look what I'm the master of this. I've got PhD after my name. I'm a pretty high density individual and I'm in charge and I'm a professor and look out because I'm the architect and this is how it works. That's the mesoteric instructing the exoteric about what to do. And then the esoteric person is more working at the mystery of things. How does it really work? What's the real truth behind it? And to run one other grid with this, I think of it like the exoteric is kind of like the three levels of the known, like working within what's known with what's known. So I've got a shovel. I used to do this so I can speak on it. I've got a shovel and I know how to move dirt and I move dirt with the shovel and I get paid at the end of the day. Okay, so that's the exoteric. The mesoteric is more the known unknown. This building doesn't exist yet, and the person's going to plan it out. And so, but they're working within known parameters. I think a great example of the known unknown, which is more the mesoteric, is you get the football coach, like in the NFL, and they're giving the new play to the team, like this has not been quite done this way before. But the reality is the entire NFL is 99% known. The only unknown is which particular team is going to win. So that's where the comfort is there. Like I'm within known set of rules. The unknown is what is the particular polarity outcome. Will it be this team or this team? It's a bipolar outcome. The esoteric, as you said, turning one's back and actually seeking to receive genuine new knowledge that hasn't been born yet, something which has not yet appeared, and is the genuine unknown. And that would take us more into the mystery rather than the mastery level, I think.
Very well said. And with this journey from mastery to mystery, let's see, David, if we can bring into this the appreciation of the invisible energy world. That's your space. That's your mastery and your mystery. And why bring that? Because we're about to explore the mystery of conductivity. So before going into it, it's useful to say that the exoteric perspective is that the world is filled with energy across a broad spectrum of frequency and wavelength ranges. That the mesoteric appreciation is that the human body, the human system operates using electrical energy across a precisely calibrated spectrum. And it metabolizes a vast array of invisible energies. So again, there is an appreciation here that goes from a superficial or surface level to a deeper level.
Yeah.
And the esoteric dimension of this will be to add a whole new, indeed, dimension, which is that humans are electrical beings. Humans are energetic electrical beings where the soul and the spirit represent a distinct electrical substrate that differs from sensory input and brain processing. It's not that it's just more rarefied. No, it actually is a whole other different substrate, a whole different dimensions, dimension, if you will, where what it affords us from an esoteric point of view is a way of recognizing actually that the human is a spirit being in the planetary material, physical experience to gain the testimony of that experience. And there is again a reversal that occurs from the mesoteric to the esoteric perspective. What would you build and say to those appreciations of the human and the energy worlds?
I would say that every human alive is processing energies. The moment we stop processing energies, we call that death. We call that's the exit. We've reached the terminal. Interesting word, terminal, because it suggests we're going somewhere else afterwards. But we reached the terminal stage. So, and we touched on it before, but at the exoteric level, every human is rooted in that exoteric level. So let's give the example. Every human needs 5 kinds of energy food, going from physical to liquid to gas to light to electrical impressions. So we've got a quintessential food source that thankfully we're on a planet that provides us with those energies, and we conduct those energies through us. We then have choice as to certain energies, like the physical food that we eat, the liquids that we choose to drink. We don't so much have the choice of the air and the light, except we take ourselves outdoors or not, or breathe cleaner air or not. And then we have the feature, which is, to me, unique to the human, because we're outside that planetary program that we spoke about in a previous current openings, that we actually then have a range of options as to what other energies we're going to bring into us from the energy field of the planet. So the invisible energy worlds, we have the energy worlds within us, within our body, within our physical body, which is the most conductive part of us, inside us. We then have our energy field around us, our personal energy field or aura, which is like the shop window of what's going on inside, and there's traces. So it says the invisible energy worlds, but to some it's to the barely visible energy worlds, because people see traces of colors and things going on in the energy field. I mean, personally, I've taught many thousands of people how to do that. So these worlds, to me, they definitely exist, but they're subtle energy, as they're now being called. They're not the kind of energy that comes out of the socket in the wall. They're direct planetary, lunar, solar, universal energies. And then we process or bring into ourselves, by how we use our brain, how we use our feelings, how we behave, we conduct. I love that. I mean, it's a great word, how we conduct ourselves. We conduct different energies through us. And those can be of a lower frequency, which is how we can say someone gets to be thick-skinned. They get to have a thick-skinned aura because they're running on low-level frequency. You can have a mid-level frequency, which you could look at it as the exoteric is it's all about me. The mesoteric starts to go, oh, how do things work, and how can I reform? I was looking at those 3 words you used, and it's like, oh, the middle one, you could almost have information, reformation, transformation. They're all formations, but they're different levels. How can I begin to reform myself? Maybe if I take a personal development course, I can improve, I can get a better mastery of life. Well, a lot of that is to do with controlling, as an example, emotional energy, how not to lose it, how not to lose one's temper, this kind of thing. And it's to do with behaving in a way that gives one the best chance of success. We get books like How to Win Friends and Influence People. That's not so much the exoteric, that's trying to become a master in what I call the river of life. But then in the esoteric, it's actually seeking to engage with the evolutionary stream, is how I think of it. That idea of Homo universalis that you've put that name to it. It's those higher frequencies, which we can't work our way into it like at the mesoteric saying, I can do it. I can do it. That's where so much work stops. Person gets themselves to a position of some kind of mastery, some kind of control on their energies. They've got their forces and they learn how to use them. That was another famous book about working with internal energies. But they get to a point of, you know what? I actually can't do it beyond a certain level without incoming higher impressions that give me some new idea and some new way. Oh, it's like the Greeks. I do need to call up the muses. I do need to call on a higher power and be able to think about things that I've never encountered in my life.
And so implicit also in what you're describing, when you talk about the move from information to reformation and from reformation to transformation, that not only do these three levels, they manifest as perspectives, they also contain different energy property, different energetic property, there is different power contained in mesoteric knowledge, in mesoteric mastery, and a different power, different conductivity. I'm leading now into the conductivity mystery that is contained in having made the investment, having made the work, having made the internal transformation to be able to contain and hold esoteric power, esoteric conductivity, which leads us to this conductivity mystery. And the place to begin this, David, is, well, we are asserting right when we started today that these are increasingly conductive times. So by way of beginning, so what is the evidence that we are experiencing increasing conductivities? Well, an exoteric starter would say we see increasing connectivity in communication and technology. We see that the world has become a little village in terms of even your capacity to travel to the other side of the world very quickly. And we see also the virality of disease and the virality of ideas is almost instant. So these are some starter exoteric commentaries about increasing conductivity. It will become more mesoteric when we integrate solar flares,
Right.
geomagnetic storms, and also not just solar flares, but mimetic flares, by which we mean that something appears in the media, in social media, and it can literally take the world, that meme can take the world by storm, or as a flare that covers the world in 24 hours. These are examples of increasing conductivity. Add to it the AI technological wave, and then add to it, from again another dimension, the tsunamis of mental conditions such as depression, loneliness, and a sense of being dislocated, which are different psychological and experiential and mood responses that seem to be appearing inside the context of increasing conductivities. So let's see, what would you build by way of evidence that we are indeed experiencing increasing conductivities, including augmenting what is here and adding a whole other perspective, please, perhaps.
Well, working with what's there, it's really interesting how in realms of conductivity, this is talking primarily about technology, and it is something to take note of that in the last 50 years, I think it was 1970, the first email was actually sent, which was, one computer communicating with another according to human instruction over distance. That was only 50 plus years ago. And with the idea of wireless phones, the AI, all of the technology is, to me, the exoteric evidence of increasing conductivity on the planet. And then we have the naturally occurring, as you say, solar flares, geomagnetic storms. We have the scientific research into which area or part of the universe our heliosphere is moving into. There's talk about a kind of plasma zone where there's a different kind of conductivity. The Russians were into this. There's all sorts of interesting researches about what's happening in the energy field of the planet and how, for example, that's connected with climate change. Yes, there's human generated, but what else may actually be going on? But at the level of technology, I'd put forward this about the exoteric and the mesoteric. The exoteric level, people are consuming information via the new technologies. So they're not controlling the information. What they are is you get a person who's on, whether it's TikTok or, or Twitter, or the different, or X as it now is, but all of these different technologies, and people are consuming information from it. The mesoteric are the people who control the algorithms. They have the mastery of the technology, and they are generating different memes according to their agendas. So you again immediately got two levels: the exoteric, which is consuming, and the mesoteric, which is then really owning and directing the technology, has mastery of the technology. And then what I find really fascinating, as we start to move toward that turnaround, that esoteric, is how at the mesoteric level, a person kind of has a choice. They can build their power over the exoteric, or they can start to try and turn the other way and ponder, what's the truth of my existence? It's all very well that I can have mastery over this technology, but why am I here? And where will I be in 100 years' time? I certainly won't have mastery of this technology. What will the case actually be? And then we start to nudge, I would say, into the unknown vector of things.
Curious note there is this this crossroad you are describing about the mesoteric, where you can either direct that mesoteric know-how to gain control and shape the experience, curate and shape the exoteric experience,
yeah,
or the interior conductivity that is beginning to build in you will awaken you to turn actually in the other direction and begin to ask new questions.
Yes.
Because one of the ways we will see a transition from the mesoteric to the esoteric is questions, and often even why questions. The curious note is I just was listening yesterday to an economic podcast where very sophisticated and smart people talk about the relationship of GDP to the all the other vectors of the economy, energy prices, gold, the geopolitical imbalances, and what's about to happen. And it's all very, very proficiently mesoteric. And then in the middle of that conversation, one of them turns around and he says, well, we're running to an unsustainable point. The whole paradigm of the global economy over the last couple of centuries, and certainly in terms of the current reserve currency of the dollar, reached a point that's not sustainable. And he made an in the moment esoteric somersault when he said, unless we actually ask ourselves,
Mhm.
Not what is the GDP, but what is the GDP for? What kind of a world we want to create?
Oh, good. Yeah,
We
yeah,
are
yeah.
not going to be able to solve those problems.
Yeah.
So this is where, having trained myself to listen to the transition from mesoteric to esoteric framing, he was making that somersault, beginning to frame completely different inquiries. So that means we are in the time of increasing conductivities, because the fact that you see people in the mastery of mesoteric more and more compelled to ask esoteric questions, that means something activates for them. And it could be simply that they see that the mesoteric paradigm that we have created can no longer solve the challenges that are in front of us. One of the reasons, one of the ways people will make a leap from mesoteric to esoteric inquiry is they see that we are not able to solve the problems we are facing in the current paradigm with the current tool set. We have to paraphrase on Einstein. What I'm showing here is an esoteric activation of latent systems in the human, including the special abilities that are coming online with new energetic permissions and content, including the capacity, for example, to integrate multiple perspectives. That is a capacity that has now become proliferated for many as part of their developmental journey. They practice seeing, observing, integrating, appreciating multiple perspectives. It's an important development transition. And I'm also referring to, for example, healing capacities and transmission capacities and much more that we will over time explore and develop, especially in the universalist context. And we have touched on in actually several of our earlier conversations. Now, I'm about to introduce one more dimension here, but is there anything you would say to an esoteric evidence that we are seeing the increase of conductivities?
Let's take one example, which is 1977 was when I first heard the idea of pineal gland activation. That was when I first even heard about a pineal gland and the idea that there was something inside the human system that if a higher signal works through the system, it can activate the pineal gland, kind of cause it to rise and begin to activate and actually send a glow around the head, like a halo, a halo, halo, halo. So that this would be an activation of the pineal gland, and that was very, very much deep esoteric understanding, which really caught me at the time. Now it's 50 years later, increasing permissions. I spoke recently to a client who said, I've just come back from Marco Island in Florida, and we were having there were 2,000 of us, and we were having a pineal gland activation weekend, right? So it's moved. That to me is like a very potent example of how something has moved in 50 years from being spoken about in sort of one small place in London where I was at the time as kind of almost whispered, whispered knowledge to becoming something that is like, oh yeah, I was just on a pineal gland activation weekend. We were doing internal meditation to bring the energy up the spine and activate the pineal gland and switch on our higher faculties. And very interesting in relation to increasing permission. Now, what I see is, at least how I read it, is a person can prepare themselves, but they need to make connection to a higher signal to actually activate that pineal gland. So they can do a lot of preparation work, but they then need to receive, I suppose, the equivalent in the fairy story, a silver kiss. They still need to receive a higher impression to actually cause it to happen. So we're in this time where the idea of human development is landing a lot in the mesoteric. I can gain mastery of myself. I can do it. But there's another step beyond that, which is then really surrendering one's development into allowing something else to enter through the system at a higher level. One
Yeah.
doesn't surrender at the exoteric because there's too much stuff just floating around of all kinds of levels, some of it highly toxic. So you don't want to just open yourself up to whatever might be there in the exoteric. You work with personal development to get yourself into a mesoteric situation. But then if a person turns around and uses that to get power and control over others, they don't enter the esoteric realm. They become a potentially, for example, a persona, a celebrity, a person who is then living for the congratulation that comes from the exoteric level. But that currently rare esoteric person is the person who's like, yeah, celebrity, power and control. Yeah, okay, that's all very well, but it doesn't actually activate my higher systems. It doesn't actually bring new impressions into the into the planet, as in the way of Homo universalis, as you've coined that term.
Well, I, I wonder if the example you gave, and I have no information I don't know about, it's the first time I'm hearing about pineal gland activation weekend, but it does sound, I wonder if that's an example of esoteric realms leaking or permeating into the mesoteric space where what is contained in the context of higher human development has turned into a commercialized opportunity. Now that the people offering that service may be completely devoted in the first principle of it, or as you said, it may be about generating funds, which is nothing wrong with that. It's the question of what is the driving motivation that is catalyzing the work. It's the reason that differentiate, the motivating, propelling reason is ultimately what will differentiate whether we are approaching something at an exoteric, mesoteric, or esoteric level. As you said, exoteric will be superficial, really mostly consideration of self. Mesoteric will be about mastery, and at the same time, the mesoteric is partly what runs scaled economics and leverage and power. So there is sophisticated dimensions of like nobody becomes a large scale billionaire without developing some mesoteric know-how about how to scale their business. So this is why sometimes you will see people actually making a leap from the exoteric to the esoteric rather than getting stopped by the mesoteric. Sometimes the mesoteric inquiry will be a blockage to the esoteric because there is part of the reversal from the mesoteric to the esoteric in the way it was practiced at different times was you're going to have to surrender your earthly possessions. Now, what that really meant was you can't be centered in the material world and enter with those possessions, with those attachments into the esoteric realms because you are oriented to sensibility and sensitivity and power sources that are different. You got me on an interesting tangent here. I want to progress though and open a whole other larger
All right.
Space here because so we just gave some evidence to the increasing conductivities. And I want us to just take a moment to what in other circumstances could be a full, not just one conversation, but several conversations, which is one where we would ask, well, but how can we understand the increase of conductivities? In other words, why is there an increase of conductivities? What is it about? And I would simply seed that the way to appreciate it is this is where we will need to begin to ask, well, what are planets for?
Right.
And how do planets enable human development? And what are the reasons and function for the epochal cycle? And part of epochal cycles is they describe times where the planet becomes initially more physical, denser physical, and with lesser conductivity. And then the times we have now moved into where planet Earth begins to gather more electrical charge and becomes more conductive, as we've described over the last several decades and really several centuries. And the briefest way to address those first two questions is to contemplate that what are planets for? Well, planets and the galaxy at large, unlike what the current general scientific perspective will induct us into, these are not merely celestial bodies like rocks traveling in space. Not at all. These are combined, complex, energetic processes that with each planet has its own particular characterization and is part of the industry of the life, birthing life, the vine of life in the universe. And it's almost as though you would ask, so, but what's the purpose of life in the universe? The purpose of life in the universe is to birth even more capable life all the way to conscious life. So the purpose of life is to give rise, to give birth to what we recognize with human life, which is the capacity of a life to become initially conscious, and then a life that is conscious of its consciousness, and then a life that is conscious of the very nature of consciousness. So in some way, it begins to offer back the learning feedback loop to the universe about its own very nature. And in that, the evolution of planets and the evolution of human life is an inseparable system. In other words, for human life to make the evolutionary transitions it needs to make, it is very much made possible by the ecologies that human can operate in. So I've just inferred that the reason we are describing increasing conductivities in this phase of the planetary evolution is because we are coming to an end, as we said in our last conversation, coming to an end or a transition from one epoch to another, where there is now a need to introduce increasing conductivities to facilitate the evolution of human life into its next phase. And what I have on the next slide is a bit of a quick recapitulation from our previous episode, but I will pause here because I suspect you might have something to say about that.
That's great. Well, that's moving into genuine, what to me is genuine esoteric inquiry. So what's happening at this time is, and you're moving us from a mechanical view of the universe, which would really land in the mesoteric level, into a purposeful universe, where we haven't accidentally developed on a random rock somewhere in space that happens to be just the right distance from the sun, and the moon just happens to be at a certain distance, so it immediately lands between the sun and the planet, so it forms an eclipse. And all of this is actually very exact and very purposeful, and that we are part of a universal process. And that is a major movement on from the current even religious world and scientific world as it currently views the planet and the human. Um, Talking to a friend of mine, this was some years ago, but he was quite an expert in translating biblical texts. And so much of our Western modern world is built on the idea, and this is very much the mesoteric mastery, that the human was given the birds, the bees, the flowers, the trees to have mastery of, to have dominance upon. And he said, well, my alternative translation is to read like a living book, to have understanding of. And that, just that shift in perspective is huge. Like I'll give an example, which is there's massive oil companies on the planet, and they're extracting oil to use in a certain way. But I've not yet met any oil executive who's paused for a moment and said, I wonder why the planet wanted oil. What's the planetary purpose of oil? It's one of those lovely questions that's like, oh, could there be a planetary purpose for oil? Was it really put there just for humans to dig out the ground and use? Or is there something else going on that's more of a universal purpose for a planet, and the human has discovered that it can use this material in a certain way? And I'm not putting an answer with it. It's just there's questions that we don't ask because we assume that the planet's here for us, rather than we're actually part of a universal process that involves the planet we live on and the sun and the heliosphere and the universe, and we're part of it. We're not somehow separated out from it. And that to me is a big part of the conductivity, because when a person feels they're isolated, they feel disconnected, which disconnected is a word that says blocking the current. Because if you're disconnected, you've no longer got the current flowing through you. So if we think of ourselves as an independent human species that's managed to conquer the planet, well, we're really disconnecting ourselves from the universe. But if we change that perspective and go, oh, I wonder why the planet wants humans. The planet pays a big price to have humans here. We do make a hell of a mess, right? Why does the universe want humans? And to be opening those questions, like you said about that economist, what's the purpose of a nation? What's the purpose of an economy? I mean, do you include in your GDP things that are destructive? Because if you've got a massive part of your GDP comes from let's say the military establishment, well, is that GDP or is that anti-GDP? Because it's actually producing destructive rather than constructive things. I'm just running a few ideas. I'm not fixing anything, but just what's the purpose of it? Like you said, what's the purpose of the human on the planet, in the universe, rather than the hooded version, which appears when we're governed by the algorithm masters from the mesoteric into us as exoteric consumers. Because humans were not born to be consumers, I would maintain.
You're demonstrating, David, that one of the ways to find your way from the mesoteric to the esoteric is in this contemplative search where you explore with inquiries. And the specific inquiry you brought about oil is a fascinating one, because what is it that would cause a planet to need to be able to produce energy potential?
Yes.
What is it about the development of the planet in this phase and through perhaps several succeeding epochs to specifically produce and store energy? Why would the planet need to do so? And what might that has to do with the kind of next stage in the evolution of the planet? So all those inquiries.
Yes. And why would the planet want to be storing solar energy? Because every oil patch It comes from the fact, as an example, trees storing solar energy, processing solar energy, and then some of that goes into storage on the planet. And the question,
Indeed.
why would the planet do that? What's the purpose? It's a fascinating, open question.
Well, so I promised I will bring a moment of recapitulation from the Epoch mystery to just support what we address now when we asked what is the nature of the epochal process. And the way we answered that was that an epoch is an evolutionary program initiated by the universe and the planet for humanity to undergo specific development. And we posed quite extensively with this idea that the culmination of the epoch is evident in the dramatic increase in connectivity and conductivity, which led us to this conversation today.
Yes.
And what we also offered was that the culmination occurs when the large epochal system reaches an indigo-violet crescendo, where the previous ways, the previous protocols, the previous methods can no longer function, can no longer operate within the same paradigmatic structure that enabled life. And what we are proposing is, therefore, that the epochal shift occurs inside the human, all around us and in between us.
Yeah.
And that attuning to the current of the epoch and its increasing conductivities involves updating and upgrading the human model and its capacities, which is where we are going in the furtherance of our inquiry today. Is there anything you'd want to say to that before I bring the next question about the conductivity mystery?
Well, I'd put a hand movement with, actually, which is what I get is a sense of something going like this.
Right.
And at the same time, the old epoch kind of going like this. So we're another name for this age that we're in, the X factor. That is, we've got something which is coming, the old is coming in like this, and a new octave is coming out the other side, which then opens, which is actually the letter X. So X to do with magnification, multiplication, and interestingly, we have that term, somehow it's the X factor. We don't call it the Y factor or the Z factor or the W factor. So the X factor is to do with some kind of special charisma in a person, which is, interestingly, how the world is so tuned into celebrities right now and looking for people who've got what they seem to be an X factor, whether it's in singing, in music, in dance, in whatever the dynamic is. There's a search for energy, but it's not only a search for energy as in the energy that we solar charge and wind farms, but the search for actual human energy. So that's to do with the energies that we conduct inside ourselves and how we are internally wired. And that is such an opening mystery, because I do believe, I also assess that the future is about humans with increasing energetic conductivity, which means their energy field gets stronger, their mental capability increases, because our brain runs on electricity. So if you get higher charge electricity running through your brain, you're going to get brighter ideas. You're going to get more going on. Like we say about people, oh, she's got it going on, or he's got it going on. What does that mean? It means there's something happening with that person. And they kind of say, oh, he's wired, she's wired. That person's in charge. It means they've got the charge, right? That person's discharged. Oh, they've no longer got the charge. We've got this terminology which describes it very accurately, that humans, all of us, process energies. And there's kind of the automatic level, heart signal, kidneys, lungs, liver. Thankfully, we don't look after that directly. Otherwise, we would not last very long. That's taken care of by universal or planetary programming. But then we've got the ability to tune ourselves in to other kinds of energy, which can be uplifting, they can be depressing, they can be anxiety making. Um, and it's not the people who run the algorithms are not responsible for what we process. We're responsible for what we process, regardless of what the algorithms are running on a particular day. And we can wire ourselves. Why is it someone needs a breath of fresh air? They take themselves out for a walk. They've been feeling compressed. They've been feeling a bit anxious. They come back from their half-hour walk. They come back from their swim in the ocean, and they're like, "Oh, I feel better now." They've re-engaged with the universe, is what's happened. And the universe, I'd say the universe loves the human.
Yes.
How can
Yes.
I prove that? Because our hearts keep beating. If the universe didn't love us, we would just drop.
So you, in many ways, led to what we're going to do beyond this slide. But I do want to just pause for a moment before we come back to what is it the human can do in a developmental context with the new conductivities, and ask, where are these conductivities coming from and why? So once again, we in some way already covered this territory, but the exoteric view would say, well, it comes from purely technological developments.
Right.
The mesoteric view would say, well, it's nature's processes. The esoteric view will say, well, there is an epochal shift in the galaxy, the planet, and the human. And the shift is co-arising, the essence of which is new energetic permissions that are necessary inside the context of the evolution of human life. And what we are going through right now is the initiatory struggle, initiatory phase of grappling with all the difficult side effects of it, because nobody ever promised that the planet will go through a transition, the human will go through evolution, and it will all be pretty. No, it's actually quite a messy process because, well, the because becomes a very interesting theological inquiry. Why is it that the universe will create a system that is not in a way foolproof, that guarantees in advance, that prevents mistake, that prevents choice? Well, because the universe is interested in the novelty factor of what new combinations and new connections and new integrations will give rise to. So it creates places like the planet where it can, in a lower conductivity, run an experiment and give rise to something like this particular humanity at this time. And now it's going to begin to ratchet the conductivity vector to discover how can we manage it. And at the moment, we seem to be, as you said, making a big mess out of it all over the planet. What would you build on this inquiry of where and why are these conductivities coming at this time?
I'd say at the exoteric level, just working with your diagram there, at the exoteric level, it's primarily about consuming from the latest technological developments and relying upon the fact that there are people in the mesoteric who are doing their best to manage the situation. So it's generous to put nature's processes. I think that in the mesoteric, you've got people trying to master nature's processes and adjust, make climate change adjustments, work with new technologies, and the exoteric consumes those technologies. And then the esoteric is actually, as you mentioned before, looking to the question. You use the word theology. I think it's very appropriate because the esoteric would be genuine theological. That is, theo meaning God. What's God's logic? Not how can I manage it, or the mesoteric. How can I survive it in the exoteric? But what's God's logic? What's the logic of theo? What's the theological dynamic inside of which we are living, and how can we connect and help in that universal purpose, which means being prepared to open our mind to the idea there is a universal purpose and that it's not limited by a particular religious view, like real theologic, or being is not to do with having a narrow band within a particular already established religious doctrine. That's mastery in the mesoteric. But actually be prepared to say, hang on, let's put world religions to one side and put what we know as science. Let's take all of that and say, well, hold on a minute. What does the universe tell us about the purpose of the human? What's the real theological dynamic, rather than what we've been told it is by people who like to stand on the pulpit and say, this is what God thinks. This is what God wants. God wants to live in this house because we're calling it God's house. Well, God has a whole universe to live in. Did anyone ask God, did you want to live in that particular house that you've built? Why would God confine itself into one building? Makes no sense. One synagogue, one mosque. It doesn't make any sense. So what's really going on? I think that's the entry to the esoteric. What's really happening? Never mind what the mesoteric algorithm keepers are going on about. Never mind that what the consumption is that's being offered in terms of religion, science, all of what's going on. Come back inside individual self and be able to put the question, why am I here?
Yeah.
What am I actually here for? Why am I here?
So I appreciate your editing there and suggestion that largely mesoteric is about mastering nature's processes. I agree with that. It occurs to me that therefore there are really two categories, two levels inside the mesoteric there, because you also do have the astrophysicist who truly try to understand why is there a cycle of increase in solar flares. And that may take them into an esoteric inquiry about how do these actually impact.
Yes.
You started by saying that the human system forever is processing energy, right? And that the day we stop processing energy is the day we go through a change from being considered alive to no longer being considered alive. And so what does it mean really when the human begins to process new kind of energies, which lead us to this question: how do increasing conductivities impact human and planetary affairs? And I would again propose that the exoteric is seen with increasing speed of change, with largely dysfunction and confusion, because as you described, the old epoch going out and the new epoch onsetting and increasing, there isn't easy interoperability between the ways of the previous epoch to the new epoch. And at the exoteric level, you're simply experiencing the dysfunction, the confusion, the chaos, and the ricocheting of conflict all over the world. Now, when it comes to the mesoteric, you are truly seeing that the global modern operating system is reaching an obsolescence threshold, that old ways, old protocols no longer work. And you might even be in the mesoteric involved in trying to remediate that, trying to either find temporary solutions for the current operating system to give it another day or another week or another year, or you are in various situations and systems exploring genuinely by asking what is breaking down, what might be necessary to build a new system that will engage you in what we're describing as the opening of universalis permissions and possibilities for the human as an individual, as a collective, mutualized, whether it's a team or a company or any organization, and even at the broadest humanity scale. These are just very, very minimalistic starters to consider the impact of these conductivities on planetary affairs. And I will simply give you a chance to play jazz with that, with the addition of this consideration, which is how are these intensifications impact the aggregated electrical and astral content, where the full energy and history of the planet is stored. Because you talked earlier about the metaphor or the analogy of thinking about a house. Well, the one way I would think about it is if your house used to run on 120 volts, and now you're going to ratchet up the voltage and the amperage, we will see all sorts of equipments in your house exploding because they are running on a system that is not adjusted to the increasing voltage and amperage. And we see this in global systems, and we see this inside the human. I imagine you might have something to say about these phenomenologies.
Yeah, it's futuristic and it's happening now. It's the times we're in. We're in the times of the increasing conductivity, and it's incrementally increasing. So what I see happening, for example, in what I call the astral light, which is to do with the dynamic of the energy field of the planet, where the signals of everything that's happened in human history and the energies that people have produced are held within that energy field. Just like the individual human, we have our own energy field, our own, you could say, our own astral light. And then inside of that, we have the record of our own personal history. That's why we can go to sleep at night and we dream of being in places we might have been in 20 years before. We can wake up going, oh, I was born in Coventry. It's like, I'm back in Coventry. Oh, how strange. And then I'm in Florida. So we know this at a personal level. Well, the planet has a global energy field. And as the conductivity increases, that becomes more potent as individuals connect in. Let's say there's an energy to do with greed that's in that astral light. There's an energy to do with anger. These are some of the lower, more toxic banks of energy. Well, a person connects into that and is going to become supercharged. They're going to become more dysfunctional. They're going to be less, there's going to be greater confusion, greater chaos, greater conflict. So it isn't that the increasing charge, it's kind of suggested sometimes in New Age circles that we're all just going to ascend. I wish. But the evidence seems to be that as the new charge comes in, it charges all levels. And so we can expect greater confusion, greater turmoil, greater disconnection at the same time as we experience greater spiritual possibility. So one way I've been speaking about this recently is the idea of the what I call the river of life, which is the majority signals flowing through, and it's becoming more and more tumultuous. I have a client recently, and she's living in a place where literally, because of a major storm, the river went up 30 feet, which is huge. And she sent me a video of her 100-year-old barn. This was her barn, right? 100 years old, been there for 100 years, floating away down the river. And, she could have tried to hold on to it, in which case she would have gone with the barn. And I feel it's a bit like that. The river of life is increasing in its power. There's nothing wrong with having, as an example, as you said earlier, money. Nothing wrong with having a large amount of money to put to good use. But if the person identifies with it, and that's their identity, and that's how they define themselves, then they're going to find themselves blocking themselves off from the increasing spiritual possibility, I would say. So it's going to be this real serious issue of what do we hang on to and what are we prepared to let go of, including not only the physical is the easiest to see, but what about our successes? Are we prepared to let go of them? What about our suffering? That's often the last thing a person wants to let go of because they call over their scars every day. And oh, what happened? What happened to me? Like we're hanging on to identity from the past, and so there's letting that go and being able to be in the present with more of an inclination to the future. And to me, that's one of the key positions to take, a key kind of alignment, because if new universal permissions are washing through the planet. And to me, the evidence is plain that that is the case, even at local level, as you said, with the geomagnetic storms, with what's coming in from the sun, with the movement of the heliosphere through the universe, that something's changing in the electrical charge of the atmosphere of the planet. That's going to affect all organic life on Earth. And we can either go with that to take that idea, we go with that flow. You can't resist the river beyond a certain point. So what we can do though is elevate, and I do believe elevate and become connected into the evolutionary signal rather than just becoming increasingly frenetic about trying to hang on to what we have.
Included in this appreciation of people trying to hold to their history, to hold to their identity, implicit in that, which you're offering, is the understanding. So when a person have the sense of who they are, their identity, what is that actually? Well, it's a formulation of the memories and internal stories which they tell themselves. And that those dimensions too, they live inside certain energy realms inside each person's field. And yes, typically a person gets up in the morning and do what they do, and they reconstitute. They yes, reconstitute who they were yesterday or who they were the week before. The proposal you're making is that if indeed the human system is receiving now new conductivities, then one of the ways to become more attuned, more aligned, more in harmony with those new conductivities would involve letting go, releasing the stories I've had in my head about who I am yesterday and being prepared to discover who I am becoming today. In other words, shifting from the defensive posture, defending my territory, defending my barn, trying to hold on to my barn, to going, as you say, with the flow of what is unfolding, inside of which means there is an invitation that you're going to be more in the unknown of yourself, including experiencing time of uncertainty or confusion or simply not knowing. So because, and this is a conundrum that I want to ask for your perspective about, we are describing here an appreciation of an increasing conductivity is kind of a phase in the evolution of planetary and human affairs. Would it be true, do you believe it is true to say that the increase occurs at several dimensions or several vectors? There is simply the increase of intensity, okay, by way of voltage, but there is also the increase of amperage, which means more is coming through. And would it also be true to say that there is an also increase in the rarefication of the rarefied realms, the levels and the refinement of what's occurring, what's arising, is also increasing? In other words, that there is an increase in the levels of luminescence that are emerging. So in which case, yes, at one level, what's the nature of this time is an intensification of everything. So as you said, if you are anchoring yourself at the level of anger, you'll become a lot more angry. If you are anchoring yourself in greed or jealousy, those will be potentized. So one of the watchouts, we are already talking about the next slide, and I'll just bring it up because it's all about this conversation. I mean, what I asked here is, how do we manage intensified conductivities, and what is the development required to enable or to be able to connect and integrate? You can tell I was doing this late in the evening last night, and integrate the higher potential latent in the conductivity increase. And implicit in what we are saying is, well, we need to continually be working to find new balances and to be regulated and functional, which means to resolve conflicts before they escalate. Because if we don't, we see the nature is just intensified polarization, intensified conflict, because just the intensity of everything is increasing. At a mesoteric level, yes, see where you can disarm resistance, conflict, and polarization to be able to assimilate and integrate multiple emerging perspectives. And what I am proposing with the esoteric is nourish and activate higher regenerative faculties and connective processes that offer healing and elevate human capacities and function, because this is where I frame this as an inquiry to get your perspective. The suggestion is the energy at one level that will intensify anything, and then within that there is an opening of permissions and refinement levels and intelligence and luminescence that were not accessible before. And what says you, David, please?
Well, I think at the exoteric and mesoteric level, actually, something we did an event, a current openings event, about managing the binary, managing polarities. And I think that is the most crucial advice about how do we manage intensified conductivities is somewhat of a warning, which is beware of polarization. Beware of becoming... I was looking at a bird flying the other day, and it struck me, wow, look at that. Look at the laws in action. Look at the universe in action. The bird has a left wing and a right wing, and is flying in a direction which is different to both the left wing and the right wing. They're pointing this way and the bird's going this way. And I thought, imagine if you got the left wing and the right wing of the bird and they started to conflict with each other. The bird could never fly. So if a bird was so attracted to one polarity and not the other, it could only go round and round in circles. It could never actually fly. It could never work.
Well, actually, it couldn't go around in circles. It will dive in circles and
yes, that's right. It would dive in circles.
There won't be any lift. This is a beautiful way of saying we humanities are looking right now at the moment, at this point in time, in most places, like we're trying to fly with one wing beating the other wing.
Exactly. Yes. And it doesn't work. It's like if one uses logic, creation logic, planetary logic, looks at how things actually work, reading the natural laws like a book, how can we go on? Well, that question that the economist asked, what's the purpose of the GDP? Well, it's like the left wing, the right wing, they need to move in the direction of what's the purpose of a country? What's the purpose of a nation? Otherwise, it degenerates into a downward spiral. So, and I think it's the same also internally. We've got our affirming power and our denying power. And if we insist on if we say, well, I'm liberal, we just insist on always being liberal, we're going to be spiraling down in our own personal life. If we say, well, I'm conservative, we're going to be spiraling down the other way. The third vector, the neutral, is to say, I will work according to what's needed and come out of that neutral place that we had that whole live event getting into that idea of the neutral, but neutral not meaning bland, neutral not being something which is like disengaged, Neutral being an active position, which is deciding, I spoke to an inventor just the other night, and we spoke about, do I invent or do I prevent? We need both. Do we have positive thinking or negative thinking? We need both. We need power of posit ion and negate ion. We need to be able to block things if they're of a lower toxic nature, so we don't get infiltrated and taken over by some nonsensical meme that somebody dreamed up. And we need to be able to negate, and we also need to be able to take a position. But if we go with only the positive, I think this is the big problem with the so-called law of attraction. When it was first introduced back in the 1920s, it was accompanied by the law of repulsion. It was two laws, it wasn't one. But the world tends to be biased towards, I want to be positive, I want to be positive. So it tries to put a positive spin on everything. But some things need what's called a hard no. We need to have a hard no on things that would actually infiltrate our mental and emotional processes and make them more and put some kind of toxic energy in there. So I think that's how we manage intensified conductivities, by actually being able to negate things in a powerful way and say yes to what we deliberately want to. But we need to balance the power of yes with the power of no. I think our willpower is only matched by our won't power. If we don't have any won't power, we're not going to have any willpower. So I think that, and then that's about managing the world. To then have a vacancy, to be able to have somewhat of a vacancy to receive new, as you said there, higher regenerative energies that go with higher and regenerative faculties that do offer healing and elevate human capacities and function. We need to block the lower to enable the higher to come through. So we're not preoccupied. Because when we're preoccupied, we get to be, a teacher once said this, he said, oh, that person over there, they're full of everything except themselves. And that is a real warning about how one can end up if one doesn't have the ability to say no and negate. So I think to be able to manage the lower, to open up to the higher, that would be the balance I'd be looking to in what could be a 12-hour conversation.
Indeed. Let's build one more last overlay to this by inviting the inquiry about what kind of resilience, specifically, what is the kind of resilience needed in times of increasing conductivities. And the exoteric idea is the idea of bounce back.
Right.
But at a mesoteric level, you already understand that you can never bounce back because the equilibrium has changed. So you really need to bounce forward into a new kind of equilibrium.
Yeah.
When it comes to the esoteric dimension, well, it invites the recognition that really we're talking about, when we talk about human life, we're talking about regenerative reconstruction, where there is an absolving and a rewiring, where there is spontaneous healing and energetic renewal. I just listened carefully to what you were saying in this last round with the previous inquiry, and you were implicit in what you were saying. You were suggesting maybe the main pathway to make the move, the reversal move from mesoteric to esoteric, because what you said was the moment, if that one wing is only interested in itself, and or it starts to beat the right wing begins to beat the left wing, it fails to see that it is part of a larger system. When we fail to see that we are part of a larger system, we become self-obsessed. We become what you'd describe as centered in self-centered. And we fail to recognize that we have a part to play inside something larger.
Yes.
And that means that we may experience a purpose in ourselves, and at the same time, there is a purpose latent in what it is we are carrying in our contribution, in the capacity that we bring to the larger system that we are part of. And the moment we forget to remember that relationality, that reciprocity, that we are part of a bigger universal part, inside of which we can serve our purpose, and we can serve our purpose best when we serve the purpose of the system, that the larger system that we are in. And I don't mean this in the context of a factory employee who's supposed to just serve the purpose of the factory, even though that system in some ways adopts and adapts the same set of logic. What we are saying is that if human life is here to participate in the co-creative evolution of the process of life, then if we walk away from that, we no longer are able not to serve the purpose of the system we are part of, but sooner or later we will see that we can't find the healing and renewal energy in ourselves. And I will simply just add one more, because you said earlier that this is really where genuine esoteric inquiry begins to emerge, that the ultimate resilience is when we begin to talk about resurrective rebirth, where you'd say that, well, the connections, the values that you choose to embody as a person, you're indestructibly tethered to those values, to those connections. And you operate out of those values and out of those connections in such a way that they will live with you to your last moment, and even beyond that last moment, until such time as you appear in a new form, but with those connections and values accompanying you through this transition. I know I went off the reservation a little bit and to the other side of the veil, but the esoteric dimension gives me the permission to actually integrate the idea of resilience all the way to the fact that there is a resurrective, rebirthing potential in human life.
Yeah.
And that's the last slide that I had for today. What would you want to say, and how would you play jazz with that?
Hey. To me, the esoteric always includes the idea of we've come from somewhere, we're here for a certain period of time, and then we're going somewhere. I mean, I've asked many folks in the years, well, where were you 100 years ago? You know, they look at me like, oh. And then the follow-up question is, where will you be in 100 years' time? It becomes self-evident that we are in a planetary form. We're a universal being in a planetary form for a certain mission, for a certain purpose, for a certain period of for a certain time of process, and that when we lose the perspective of being part of the universe, we disconnect ourselves. So that kind of resilience needed in times of increasing conductivities is we are participants in the now moment in the universe. We actually are participatory. We're not separated out. We're not an isolated ego. I give one example of something happened upon me the other day, which was that I thought to myself, I'm breathing, which was a nice thought, I'm breathing. But then what happened was, and I think this was turning the back and going for a moment into the esoteric, something else came in and just said, no, the universe is breathing through you. And it's like, oh, that's different. And so 8 billion of us on the planet, we think we're breathing because we take it personally. I take my breathing personally because it's my breathing, right? Meanwhile, and you're breathing, but the other 8 billion people are breathing. But actually, I don't know how to breathe. I didn't turn on breathing. It happened. It happened by a universal signal upon me. I don't keep my own heart beating. But there was this moment where it just went, no, it's not I'm breathing. I'm the one who's drawing in the air. The universe is breathing through me. And that just flipped it. And for me, that was one of those moments where you kind of feel the rug being pulled out from under your own feet, and you realize, oh, it's not the way I think it is.
Well, it's a beautiful example that there is a reversal from the mesoteric to the esoteric. There is truly a reversal, and we touched the mystery of the reversal a little bit in an earlier conversation when we talked about the mystery of octaves and octave leaps.
Yes.
There is something about the mystery of the reversal from the mesoteric to the esoteric in that it prevents you from carrying, as you said, not just your successes. It prevents you from carrying your successes and your sufferings.
Yes.
Into that new dimension. My parting invitation for us today is that can we consider that one of the ways we humans are called to evolve in such times as these times where the conductivity is increasing is, number one, build a better set of harmonies in ourselves, such that I'd say, better integrate and better harmonize on the inside, such that, first of all, your internal lives and the orchestra that you are on the inside is not playing a discordant music, but rather is playing harmonious music, number one.
Yeah.
And number two, do the development work, the refinement work, to actually intensify your internal conductivities. Because the way to safely and effectively manage increasing conductivities is to build in your interiority the capacity to handle and generate higher conductivities. And so many of the current openings conversations explored a variety of pathways into that work. So, David, thank you for this
Thank you, Aviv.
Journey today into the mystery of conductivities. And I think we possibly produced here the starter that will lead us into what comes in
the next 21.
The next 21. Thank you, David.
Hey, thank you, Aviv. Bye for now. Bye now.
Along with our website at portalsofperception.org, Portals is also available on YouTube and on all podcast platforms, as well as social media. You can become an active member and join the conversation in community events. And you can help us get the word out by liking this content and by sharing it with your friends.